All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Welcome back to the Dharma Doors. I'm MC Owens, and this is the San Francisco Dharma Collective. Tonight, we are reading a very special sutta tonight. So tonight we're looking at, as usual, we're in the Majjhima Nikāya. We're moving on to sutta number 86, and the sutta tonight is the Aṅgulimāla Sutta. And this is a pretty famous sutra in that way. It's one of those sutras that it comes up a lot. It's going to be interesting tonight because if you're like me, you've heard the story. You've probably heard part of the story of Aṅgulimāla, but tonight is going to be so interesting because we're going to read the whole sutta, and don't be afraid, it's not that long, but we're going to read the whole sutta, and there's actually a lot to this teaching, much more than I had originally thought. Um, yeah, there's a way in which I feel like only one part of this sutra gets talked about, but there's actually much, much more to it than you kind of, hear about in that way. Um, yeah, so since we have such a great sutra to get to, let's get to it. Um, yeah, I guess the only thing you need to know, well, actually, I'll pause sooner than later because I have something to mention about this kind of the main character of this teaching. So, but let's dive in and kind of get things moving along. So again, this is the Aṅgulimāla Sutta. Ah, before though, I just also want to remind you, because this is also going to be really important. I want to remind you that we are still in that section of the Majjhima Nikāya where it's the all the discourses to the kings. Remember, this is the Rajavagga section. And so even though the focus of this sutra is going to be this character Aṅgulimāla, we want to remember, oh, but this is a Raja Sutra. So we're going to want to pay attention to that. But let's get the setting. Let's see what's going on. So, thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Now, on that occasion, there was a bandit in the realm of King Pasenadi of Kosala, a bandit named Aṅgulimāla, who was murderous, bloody-handed, given to blows and violence, merciless to living beings. Villages, towns, and districts were laid to waste by him. He was constantly murdering people, and he wore their fingers as a necklace. So the name of this is an Aṅgulimāla. So you've heard of a mala. So like you've probably heard of mala beads, but a mala is actually kind of a garland or a necklace in that way. And this is a particular kind of mala. This is an anguli. So you know the root of this word, anga. So that the root of this word, anga, is a limb, right? Like a part, a branch of a tree, like a sangha. That's the root word anga. Like the ashtanga, the 8 limbs of yoga, that's the ashta anga. So the anga is a thumb, or an anguli is a thumb. And so this person wore a rosary or a mala of thumbs. Now, the thing, I want to mention this really quickly. In this version, the Wisdom publication version, Bhikkhu Bodhi and Bhikkhu Nyanamoli, they have a very funny footnote. And I just want to mention this because it's actually very, it has a lot to do with what's going on with this sutra. So if you read footnote 820 here, Bhikkhu Bodhi, he gives a whole background story to Aṅgulimāla. Now, in this sutra, all we hear is that Aṅgulimāla was a murderous bandit, prone to violence, and that he laid villages and towns to waste, and he wore a mala of fingers or a mala of thumbs. But if you read the footnote, Bhikkhu Bodhi is going to give you this whole backstory of why Aṅgulimāla was doing this. And the thing about it is the story that I always heard was that Aṅgulimāla had he'd sort of made a vow to collect either 1,000 fingers or just 100 fingers, or the classic version is 101 fingers. And then the story or the commentary is that he had collected 100 and he only needed one more, right? So that's like the backs. And actually, if you read the footnote, they give a whole backstory about, let me try to summarize it very quickly. Supposedly, Aṅgulimāla was actually, his original name was Ahimsaka, the non-violent one. And Ahimsaka, the non-violent one, was the student of a teacher. And he was the beloved student of the teacher. All the other students, they didn't like Ahimsaka. And so they started spreading a rumor that Ahimsaka was sleeping with the teacher's wife. The teacher found out about this rumor, thought it was true, and told Ahimsaka, if you love me so much, then go collect me 101 or 1,001 fingers. And the backstory is this whole backstory about like devotion to the teachers and like all of this stuff. And I've actually heard other backstories about this person. And what I find so interesting, and this is again, this is just a little anecdote. Bhikkhu Bodhi is no joke. He is a premier scholar. And if you go through all of his work, if you go through all of his footnotes, he is he crosses all his I's and dots all his T's. But if you read that footnote, he doesn't give a source for it. And it's really interesting because there's like, how could I put this? If you go around like the internet, or if you go old fashioned and read books, I know that I have heard so many different teachers tell the story of Aṅgulimāla, and they all tell it a little differently. And it's kind of in a way a great example of upaya, where in order to convey a certain message, teachers, good teachers, they use this story to convey a message. And it would seem as if at some point somebody used this story to convey the message about too much devotion to the teacher or something like that. So I just want you to know that if you have this edition or if you're curious, there is a backstory to who this person is and why they were doing all of this. However, I do want everybody to know that I think that there's a reason to, I think, I think, there's a reason to just read the sutra here and to not actually worry about these other aspects of the story, because there's a couple of those aspects of the story that I actually think detract from the message. So I'm not going to go deep into why Aṅgulimāla is doing all of this. So, but then, when it was morning, the Blessed One dressed, and taking his bowl and outer robe, he went into Savatthi to beg for food, to beg for alms. When he had wandered for alms in Savatthi and had returned from his alms round, after his meal, he set his resting place in order, and then taking his bowl and his outer robe, the Blessed One, the Buddha, he set out on the road leading towards Aṅgulimāla. Cowards, shepherds, plowmen, and travelers saw the Blessed One walking along the road leading towards Aṅgulimāla, and they told him, "Ooh, don't take this road. Don't take this road, recluse. On this road is the bandit Aṅgulimāla, who is murderous, bloody-handed, given to blows and violence, merciless to living beings. Villages, towns, and districts have been laid to waste by him. He is constantly murdering people, and he wears their fingers as a necklace. Men have come along this road in groups of 10, 20, 30, even 40, but still they've fallen into Aṅgulimāla's hands." But when all of this was said, the Blessed One went on in silence. For a second time, the cowards and the shepherds and the plowmen and the travelers saw the Blessed One, and they told him, "Don't take that road. Aṅgulimāla's down there. He's murderous." But the Blessed One just went on in silence. And for a third time, the cowards and the shepherds and the plowmen and the travelers tried to tell the Blessed One, but still the Blessed One went on in silence. We have to appreciate the dramaturgy, right? They're building this up. So then, when the bandit Aṅgulimāla saw the Blessed One coming in the distance, and when he saw him, he thought, "It is wonderful. It's marvelous. Men have come along this road in groups of 10, 20, 30, even 40, but still they've fallen into my hands. But now this recluse comes alone, unaccompanied, as if forcing his way. Why shouldn't I take this recluse's life?" Aṅgulimāla then took up his sword and his shield, buckled on his bow and quiver, and then followed close behind the Blessed One. And then the Blessed One performed a siddhi or a riddhi. He performed such a feat of supernatural power that the bandit Aṅgulimāla, although running as fast as he couldn't catch up to the Blessed One, who was walking at a normal pace. Then the bandit Aṅgulimāla thought, "It's wonderful. It's marvelous. Formerly, I could catch up even to a swift elephant and seize it. I could catch up even to a swift horse and seize it. I could catch up even to a swift chariot and seize it. I could catch up even to a swift deer and catch it. But now, though I'm running as fast as I can, I can't catch up with this recluse who is walking at a normal pace. Aṅgulimāla then stopped and called out to the Blessed One, "Stop, Shramanya! Stop!" And the Buddha said, "I have stopped, Aṅgulimāla. You should stop too." Then the bandit, Aṅgulimāla, thought, "These Shramanyas, these recluses, these sons of Shakyans, they speak the truth. They assert the truth. But though this recluse is still walking, he says, I've stopped. And although I, Aṅgulimāla, have stopped, he says I'm walking. Suppose I question the recluse. Then the bandit, Aṅgulimāla, addressed the Blessed One in a gattaha, in a poetic song. And he said, "While you are walking, recluse, you tell me you have stopped. But now, when I have stopped, you say I have not stopped. I ask you now, O recluse, about the meaning of this. How is it that you've stopped and I have not?" Aṅgulimāla, I have stopped forever. I abstain from violence towards living beings, but you have no restraint towards things that live. That's why I've stopped, and you have not. "Oh," Aṅgulimāla said, "oh, at long last, this recluse, a venerated sage, has come to this great forest for my sake. Having heard your stanza teaching me the Dharma, I will indeed renounce evil forever." So saying this, the bandit took his sword and weapons and flung them into a gaping chasmous pit. The bandit worshipped the Sublime One's feet, and then and there he asked for the going forth. And the Enlightened One, the sage of great compassion, the teacher of the world with all of its gods, addressed him with these words, "Come, bhikkhu." And that was how he came to be a bhikkhu. Then the Blessed One set out to wander back to Savatthi with Aṅgulimāla as his attendant. Wandering by stages, they eventually arrived at Savatthi, and there they lived at Savatthi in the Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. All right, so that's part one. I sort of divide the sutra into 4 movements, or like 4 chapters. So that's the first part, which is kind of the conversion of Aṅgulimāla. Yeah. And that's the part that you usually hear about. And it's that famous, it's a very famous line where the Buddha says, "I have stopped. You should stop too." Right? So this is slowly becoming one of my favorite sutras, and we haven't even really gotten to the good part yet in that way. But I do want to kind of pause for a moment to reflect on this very interesting, almost kind of like psychedelic situation, right? Where the Buddha's just sort of walking and Aṅgulimāla is like running and running and trying to get him, right? It's almost as if like in a dream, right? That kind of feeling of not really being able to reach it, right? So it's already kind of weird in that way. But what a beautiful teaching, right? What a beautiful message. I there's a way in which like this has been on my mind, but not exactly, the message is clearly about violence and abstaining from violence and this idea of like, yeah, I've stopped being violent. You should stop being violent too. But I think at a deeper level, I think a lot about this in terms of like um, wealth acquisition or even material acquisition. And this idea of like, yeah, a Buddha has stopped. The Buddha is not in need of anything anymore. And I'm always sort of trying to really celebrate and really honor that, what I call that kind of sovereignty of like really being self-sovereign in that way, of like really not needing or wanting anything, and really looking at that as being free. And if you really look at that, a Buddha who has stopped forever, if you look at that, all of a sudden, then you kind of look to like, it sort of doesn't matter whether you're wealthy or poor. If you're totally like desperately scraping and trying to get more, you're not free. Whereas the Buddha has stopped in that way. So again, even though I think, the sutra is definitely explicitly about violence and abstaining from violence, I think you could read it a lot of different ways. So, but again, we are really only at the beginning. So, everybody ready to move to part two? The king. We forgot about the king. So, part two, this is about King Pasenadi. So now, on that occasion, the great crowds of people were gathering at the gates of King Pasenadi, who, by the way, king of Kosala, king of the county or country where Savatthi is, where the Jeta's grove is. So the crowd comes and says, Sire, the bandit Aṅgulimāla is in your realm. He is murderous, bloody-handed, given to blows and violence, merciless to living beings. Villages, towns, and districts have been laid to waste by him. He's constantly murdering people, and he wears their fingers as a garland. The king must put him down. Then, in the middle of the day, King Pasenadi of Kosala drove out of Savatthi with a cavalry of 500 men and set out for the park. He drove as far as the road was passable for carriages, and then he dismounted from his carriage and he went forward on foot to the Blessed One. After paying homage to the Blessed One, he sat down to one side, and then he said to the Blessed One, and then the Blessed One said to the king, looking at all of the cavalry, saying, oh, what is it, great king? Is King Saniya of Bimbisara of Magadha attacking you? Or is it the Lichavis of Vaisali? Or other hostile kings? Like where's the war? Right? Venerable sir, the king replied, King Saniya Bimbisara of Magadha is not attacking me, nor are the Lichavis of Vaisali, nor are other hostile kings. But there is a bandit in my realm named Aṅgulimāla, who is murderous, bloody-handed, given to blows and violence, merciless to living beings. Villages and towns and districts have been laid to waste by him. He's constantly murdering people and wears their fingers as a garland. I shall put him down, venerable sir. And the Buddha said, Maharaja, great king, Suppose you were to see that Aṅgulimāla, and suppose you were to see that he had shaved his head off and shaved his beard and put on yellow robes and had gone forth into the homeless life. What if you saw that he was abstaining from killing, abstaining from taking what has not been given, and abstaining from false speech? Suppose you saw that he was eating only one meal a day, and that he was celibate, virtuous, and of good character. If you were to see him like that, how would you treat him? Oh, venerable sir, we would pay homage to him, or we would rise to him, or we would invite him to be seated, or we would invite him to accept robes from us, alms food, a resting place, or medicinal requisites, or we would arrange for him lawful guardianship, defense, and protection. But venerable sir, how could such an immoral person, one of such evil character, ever have such virtue and restraint? Now, on that occasion, the venerable Aṅgulimāla was sitting not far from the Blessed One. Then the Blessed One extended his right hand and said to King Pasenadi of Kosala, "Great king, this is Aṅgulimāla." Then King Pasenadi was frightened. He was alarmed. He was terrified. Knowing this, the Blessed One told him, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, great king. There's nothing for you to fear from him." Then the king's fear, alarm, and terror subsided. He went over to the venerable Aṅgulimāla and said, "Venerable sir, is the noble lord really Aṅgulimāla?" "Yes, great king." "Venerable sir, of what family is the noble lord's father? Of what family is the mother?" "My father is a Gaga, great king. My mother is a Mantanyi." "Let the noble lord, Gaga Mantaniputta, rest content. I shall provide robes, alms food, a resting place, and medicinal requisites for this noble lord, Gaga Mantaniputra." Now, at that time, the venerable Aṅgulimāla, he was a forest dweller, an alms food eater, a refuse rag wearer, and he restricted himself to the 3 robes. He replied to the king, "Enough, great king. My 3 robes are enough." King Pasenadi then returned to the Buddha, returned to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, he sat down to one side and he said, "It is wonderful, venerable sir. It's marvelous how the Blessed One tames the untamed, brings peace to the unpeaceful, and leads to nirvana those who have not yet attained nirvana. Venerable sir, we ourselves could not tame him with force and weapons. Yet the Blessed One has tamed him without force, without weapons. And now, venerable sir, we depart. We are busy and we have a lot to do." "You may go," the Buddha said. "You may go, great king, at your convenience. I'll see you later." Then King Pasenadi of Kosala rose from his seat, and after paying homage to the Blessed One, keeping him on his right, he departed. So, part two. I think part two is even more important than part one. This message of how powerful the Buddha's teachings are, that they could tame somebody like Angulimala without force and without weapons. What a message. What a message. I really like, I really don't know which is more significant. Like the conversion of such a kind of a tyrant, such a madman, or this message that it was done without any violence. And by the way, just really quickly, the language of taming the untamed, that's a tricky word. And, the word that we're talking about is vinaya or vinaya. That's that idea of being disciplined or being tamed. And, one of the 10 titles of a Buddha, it's one of the more interesting titles, by the way. Sure, he's Arhat, right? He's a Buddha, he's Arhat, he's Tathagata, but he's also called a human tamer. Like a lion tamer. Yeah, a Buddha is a human tamer. And I always find that such an interesting idea. And so I just kind of want to point out that there's a whole uh, like a whole thing going on in Buddhism around this idea of taming the mind, taming the conditioned behaviors, like controlling them. And I think it's interesting if you think about the Dharma, if you think about how much, um, if you think about the significance of samskara, of conditioning, that this idea that it's all habitual, it's all conditioning, then the idea of taming, like it makes sense from like a kind of behavioral science kind of point of view. So just wanted to point out that idea. And this, again, this beautiful idea that the Buddha tames without force and without weapons. But it just keeps getting better, though. No.
Um, yeah, that's amazing. At the end of the first part, well, toward the end of the first part, when uh, he threw his weapons off, or right before then, he said something like, finally, someone came into the woods to help me, or something like that, or for me. I think that was the language. The online version is slightly different. So, I mean, if you think of it in like human terms, it's like the Buddha came to him in a caring way, not in a like, violent way, like the king was coming. Or also, for me, I was thinking in terms of what you just said, that the Dharma is tames us. That the Dharma comes to us in this like, really open, giving way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that we are, without getting too interpretive, I think we are to read it that when the Buddha's headed that way, and all of the townspeople say, "Oh, don't go that way. There's like a murderer there." I think we are to kind of read between the lines that the Buddha's like, "Oh, really? Oh, well then I'm going to go there then because I'm in the business of helping people like not be that way."
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like when the people are like, "No, no, don't go," really, like, and they a second and a third time, and he just keeps going. I think we're to understand that it's not that he just had to go through there. I
Right.
think he was like, no, okay, I'll go take care of this. So,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Part three. So then, when it was morning, the venerable Angulimala dressed and taking his bowl in his outer robe, he went into Savatthi to beg for alms. As he was wandering for alms from house to house in Savatthi, he saw a certain woman in difficult labor. So she was giving birth in painful labor. And when Angulimala saw this woman in painful labor, he thought, how beings suffer. Ah, indeed, how beings suffer. When he had wandered for alms in Savatthi and had returned from his alms round, after his meal he went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, he sat down to one side and said, Venerable Sir, this morning I dressed, and taking my bowl and outer robe, I went into Savatthi to beg for alms. As I was wandering for alms from house to house in Savatthi, I saw a certain woman in difficult labor, painful labor. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, how beings suffer. Oh, indeed, how beings suffer. And the Buddha said, in that case, Angulimala, go back into Savatthi and say to that woman, Sister, since I was born, I do not recall that I have ever intentionally deprived a living being of life. By this truth, may you be well, and may your infant be well. But Angulimala said, Venerable Sir, wouldn't I be telling a deliberate lie? For I have intentionally deprived many living beings of life. Okay, then, Angulimala, go back into Savatthi and say to that woman, Sister, since I have been born with the noble birth, I do not recall that I have intentionally ever deprived a living being of life. By this truth, may you be well, and may your infant be well. Yes, Venerable Sir, Angulimala replied, and having gone into Savatthi, he told that woman, Sister, since I have been born in the noble birth, I do not recall that I have ever intentionally deprived a living being of life. By this truth, may you be well, and may your infant be well. Then the woman and the infant both became well. And then, before long, dwelling alone, withdrawn, diligent, ardent, and resolute, the Venerable Angulimala, by realizing for himself with direct knowledge, here and now, he entered upon and abided in that supreme goal of the holy life for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the home life into homelessness. And he directly knew birth is destroyed. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There's no more coming back into any rebirth state of existence. And the Venerable Angulimala became one of the Arhats. All right, so we have a lot to talk about with this one, right? So, yeah. So, right, by the way, there is an interesting note, and this is a real note, a real footnote, but it has to do with the language, the Pali language that's used to describe the woman giving birth. And it seems as if the specific language means that the baby was turned kind of sideways. And so, like, rough, super rough in that way. And that's where Angulimala sees this and has this, well, the story, the commentary story is that this is the first moment that Angulimala felt compassion for another person. And so when he goes back to the Buddha and he's like, yeah, I saw this terrible thing. I saw this woman give, it was terrible. the Buddha recognized, oh, he's totally converted in that way. But then he tells him this really interesting thing about, yeah, okay, you should go there and tell her, since I've been born, I've never intentionally deprived a living being of life. And then Angulimala says the thing of like, but that's not true. I can't say that. And then the Buddha changes the language. And he changes the language to this language, and it varies depending on which translator you're reading. But it's this idea of since I've been born of a noble birth. And now we need to talk about something that I we've talked about it at certain points, but we don't talk about it a lot. And what it is we don't talk a lot about the actual language of like the noble path. It's the eightfold noble path. And an arahat is a noble one. There's this all of this language in Buddhism about nobility. But wait a minute. Don't we usually reserve the language of nobility for monarchs? For like the rulers in that way? So interesting, right? That in the world of Buddhism, so there's a lot going on here, but in the world of Buddhism, the first thing that we want to kind of recognize, you know the story, you've heard the story, the classic story, the life story of the Buddha, that he was born a prince, but he renounced the throne, went off to become, an ascetic, and then became enlightened, right? But what happens in Buddhism, and by the way, I want to remind everybody, this is an early sutta. This is not one of those Mahayana, one of those sutras. This is one of the original sutras. So this idea that I'm about to get into, this is an old Buddhist idea. And what it is, it's complicated. The first level of it is understanding the idea or the language where the Buddha is called the Dharma Raja. He's the Dharma king. And the idea is that in the world of Buddhism, the Buddha is the new monarch, the new king. And what that means is the Buddha's disciples are all royal heirs. So that's the first layer of understanding what the Buddha means by ever since I've been born in the noble birth. So the idea is that there's this idea that when you kind of convert to Buddhism, you are then kind of taking on, you take on a new name, you give up your family name. Um, a funny little aside, my master's thesis, so I wrote a master's thesis for the University of Hawaii. And what I did was I did a kind of a Freudian analysis of Buddhist monasticism. And I looked at all of basically, there's a lot of regression to infancy that happens in terms of shaving all your body hair off and giving up your family name and taking on a new name. So there is a whole kind of rebirth or like what I'm really getting around to, by the way, what's happening here in part 3 of the sutra, this is the Buddhist version of being born again, right? You've heard this language, the Christian language of being a born again Christian. And it's the idea that I led led a terrible life as a sinner, and then I accepted Jesus as my savior, and I've been born again. Well, the Buddhists were doing that 500 years before the Christians. They were talking about this idea of being born again, but like midlife in that way. So that's the second layer. So the first layer is just the whole kind of idea that the Buddha's the new king and all the disciples are sort of heirs of the Dharma Raja. The second layer, though, is this idea of being a born again Buddhist in that way. And what we need to remember, or what we need to keep in mind, what's going on in this section of the sutra, and it's going to spill over into the next section. What we're dealing with right now is, all right, Aṅgulimāla, he converted. He's now abstaining from killing. He's abstaining from taking what has not been given. He's abstaining from false speech. That's great. But what about all that bad stuff he did? Like he just gets to like walk away from all of that? How, like, what's up with all of that? So now we're about to get to the deepest layer of this. So the Buddha sets the first time and it's interesting actually that the Buddha said to him initially, yeah, you should just go to the woman and say, since I was born, I've never deprived a living being of life. And Angulimala is like, yeah, I couldn't say that. That would be a lie. So the Buddha changes the language, and then Angulimala is like, oh, you mean I haven't killed anybody since I've been a Buddhist? Like since I took the vows. Oh, yeah, that's true. So he understands what the Buddha means. But I think it's important to note that the Buddha was ready to have him just say, since I've been born, without this qualifier. And that gets us to this deepest level. And that has to do with like, it's complicated and I don't want to give away too much because we still have a couple of sections to go. But we need to sort of really be thinking about so much of the deeper Dharma that we talk about on Sunday nights. In particular, I'm talking about those deep Dharma lessons about no self, birthlessness, and things like that. So, really quickly, I just want to refresh your memory. So, we talk a lot in our Dharma discussions and in Dharma doors. We talk a lot about, I guess you would just simply call it identity. The age-old existential question, who are you? Or from a Buddhist point of view, better yet, what? What are you? Now, the kind of the normal default mode way of thinking is, of course, that I am this. This is me. So it could be that the mind is identifying as the body. It's identifying with the body as the body. And there's something that then could like happen with that idea, which is that if I am the body, then what comes along with that is an idea of being so many years old, right? Because if I'm the body and the body is 50 years old, then I'm 50 years old, right? It's a simple syllogism, I believe, right? And so if I'm thinking that way, so if the mind is identifying with the body and therefore identifying with the being, say, 50 years old, that means I had a birthday. And that birthday, the day that I was born, was about 50 years ago. And I came flying out of the womb. I did. I did. 50 years ago. So that's one way of thinking, right? And again, it's kind of the default mode way of thinking. But of course, you're probably already noticing all of the problems with that way of thinking. But let's go through them. The first thing to think about is that this is not what was born 50 years ago. My mother would have had a terrible time. Forget what Aṅgulimāla witnessed, right? If this is what was born, so obviously this is not what was born, right? So now this is getting complicated because I talk and I think in terms of me being 50 years old, even though this is not what was around 50 years old or 50 years ago. But I'm identifying with this as the self. But then that gets even more complicated because, as you know, we go through this a lot in Dharma doors, and it's the idea that you have hands. But if for some reason you lost a hand, you would still say you're you. You would just say, I no longer have a hand. Well, so it sounds to me like you are not the hands. You have hands, but you're not the hands. So now the self thing is now not the body. You see what I just did there, right? That you don't even think you're the body, actually. You think you have a body. So now all of a sudden, if you are not the body, but you have a body, wait, what are you again? My point is this. The default mode program is the program that thinks chronologically in time, which says, yes, I was 50 years old. But if you really look into the situation, what's really kind of going on is a present state of awareness that is no age because it has only just arrived, right? Ta 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 in that sense. So if you're following me, then what I'm getting at is I'm kind of trying to point at the noble birth, not the delusion of a vaginal birth, right? Because again, if you really look into it, that you being vaginally born, that never actually happened in that way, right? So the Buddhists have always been talking about what they call well, there's a couple of ways of talking about it. It's either the continuity of consciousness or one of my favorite kind of expressions, the mind stream. One word, mind stream. And it's the idea that you are this now. But the idea of like you over time, that means you as an entity, as a thing, as an object. And that's where, again, we're hard pressed to find that object of self. We can experience that, but we could never actually like find it and put it in a box and mail it to somebody else, right? So the basic idea here is about this, again, delusion of an idea of birth versus this idea of being nobly born, which is this idea of either converting to Buddhism at the most superficial level, we could say that it's becoming a Buddhist. At a slightly deeper level, it's about sort of taking on a new identity as a child of the Buddha. And then at the deepest level, it's about actually kind of coming into the mind stream and getting out of the delusion of being an entity in time and space. So that's part 3 on the noble birth, the Ariyaya Jati. Any questions about that? We have kind of one more big part to go and then a poem. All right. And by the way, this sutra, like all great sutras, it's very like cumulative, where like all of these ideas are building and building. Oh, and there's one last piece from the thing that I didn't mention. It has to do with like, it's just so beautiful. And what I mean is it has to do with the last part, and we've heard this before. The language of birth is destroyed, right? That's when you become an arhat, you realize birth is destroyed. That delusion of having been born is utterly gone. Birth is destroyed. But so this section, what I'm calling section 3, we want to notice this beautiful thing that's going on between Aṅgulimāla goes into town and sees a woman giving birth. And it's a difficult birth. It's suffering. But then the Buddha says this whole thing about go to her and basically have this little discourse about the noble birth. And then this section concludes with Aṅgulimāla destroying birth. So it's just such a beautiful, like, just the layers of like meaning and stuff. It's just so beautiful. So we get this whole birth is destroyed. He's become an arhat. And now sort of this last little section before the final poem. So it's a new day. So then, when it was morning, the Venerable Aṅgulimāla dressed, and taking his bowl and outer robe, he went into Savatthi to beg for alms. Now, on that occasion, someone threw a clod of dirt and hit the Venerable Aṅgulimāla's body. Someone else threw a stick and hit his body. And someone else threw a potsherd and hit his body. Then, with blood running from the cut of his head, with his bowl broken, and with his outer robe torn, poor guy, the Venerable Aṅgulimāla went to the Blessed One. The Buddha, the Blessed One, saw Aṅgulimāla coming in the distance and told him, "Bear it, Brahmin, bear it. You are experiencing here and now the result of deeds because of which you might have been tortured in hell for many years, for many hundreds of years, for many thousands of years." And then, having heard that, the Venerable Aṅgulimāla is going to recite an ecstatic poem and called an Udana. But quickly, though, we need to talk about what just happened there. So there's a couple of really important things that I need to say about this section. This section is really important. So, of course, what's happening is very clear. Aṅgulimāla goes to town to beg for food, and people basically, I think we're to understand that people recognize that he's Aṅgulimāla, and so they start throwing stuff at him, right? And he's getting pelted, he's getting bloody, and the Buddha says, just bear it, just deal with it, dude. Because what's happening is you're experiencing karmic retribution that you actually should have experienced later on in life. And here's where things get interesting, kind of doctrinally. Because Angulimala has become an arhat, he doesn't have any more rebirths. He's not going to have a future rebirth. So there's this really interesting thing that takes place in the world of Buddhism, early Buddhism again, not Mahayana, but the older style Buddhism. There's this thing that goes on, which is that if you're become an arhat, and that means you're done with the samsaric cycle of death and rebirth, well, all of that karma that you should have experienced later on in life or in your future lives, you're not going to have those future lives. So you're going to have to deal with it all now in this life. And so the first thing that I want to say is I do not think anybody should interpret this as the Buddha saying, yeah, everybody just deal with whatever, if people are being mean to you, just deal with it, just bear it. I do not think that that's the message of this. Now, there's other teachings of the Buddha that extol the virtue of patient tolerance, the kshanti. So there's other sutras where the Buddha is going to tell people, if people are being kind of mean to you, it's probably a nice, wise move to just be patient about that. But in this particular case, the Buddha is speaking specifically to an arhat and specifically saying to him, you should in a way almost be excited that this is happening to you because it means you're actually an arhat in that way. So that's that. I have one other really interesting, well, I think it's interesting thing to say about this, but any questions about this karmic little technicality here? So I just want to share it with everybody, and I'm glad that we have enough time. So this is a very interesting parenthetical. So we're putting Angulimala to the side for a second. And I want to mention for a moment, the Diamond Sutra, otherwise known as the Vajra Sutra, the Vajra Prajnaparamita Sutra. So if you don't know, of course, the Diamond Sutra is a very early Mahayana sutra. It is in many ways the foundation of Mahayana Buddhism. It sort of very much marks the beginning of Mahayana Buddhist sutras, Mahayana Buddhist thinking, Mahayana everything. I teach courses on this. I love this sutra. It's essential to the Zen tradition. It's essential to a lot of traditions. There's a chapter in here, chapter 16. And chapter 16 has always, as a translator, chapter 16 has always given me problems. If you read different translations of the Diamond Sutra, chapter 16 has some of the most diverse translations, people translating all different kinds of ways. I'm going to read to you, this is my translation, and I'm not going to read all of chapter 16. It's a short chapter anyways, but this is just the very beginning, and you'll know right away why I'm reading this to you. So the Diamond Sutra, the Diamond Sutra is famous for praising the Diamond Sutra. Meaning, like, if you've read the Diamond Sutra, it talks a lot about itself as being like a really great sutra. And I know that that puts off a lot of people, but I think it's kind of a misunderstood part of the sutra. But regardless, chapter 16, the Buddha says to Subhuti, the main person he's talking to, he says, furthermore, Subhuti, virtuous men and virtuous women who receive, retain, read, recite this Vajra Sutra, or sorry, virtuous men and women who receive, retain, read, and recite this sutra, who are then disdained by others, who should have fallen into the evil paths from karmic offenses in their former lives, yet, due to the disdain of others in the present life, the karmic offenses of their former lives will then be eradicated, and they will attain Anuttara Samyak Sambuddhi. So I have to tell you that until really getting into the Aṅgulimāla Sutta here and hearing this last part where the Buddha tells him, oh, yeah, you need to just bear this disdain that you're receiving, but basically don't worry, it means you're an arhat. The same message is what's going on in here, except, and this is where the Vajra Sutra gets interesting. It's where all of Mahayana gets very interesting. What it's saying is, if you read the Diamond Sutra and then like somebody does something mean to you, you should be excited about it because it means you too are bound for Buddhahood. So in other words, what the Buddha says to Aṅgulimāla in this sutra, the Buddha says to you, the reader, in this sutra. And that's what makes Mahayana sutras very interesting, because they speak directly to the reader of the sutra. And it makes them, or it's what I call the never-ending Dharma in that way. So if you've ever wondered about chapter 16 of the Diamond Sutra, now we know where the original kind of reference is. I'm sure there are probably other sutras where this pops up, but this is an important one. So any questions about that last little bit? All right. So then on to the Udana. So you'll remember that when Aṅgulimāla had his psychedelic run-in with the Buddha, right? And when he was running to try to get him and he couldn't reach him, you'll recall, or you may recall, that Aṅgulimāla, he recited a gatha, it's called. And a gatha is just sort of like a poem, basically, which is not much, it's, just a poem. But the last part of this sutra, it says, so this is after the Buddha tells him just bear the what you're going through. Then it says, while the Venerable Aṅgulimāla was alone in retreat, experiencing the bliss of deliverance, he uttered this udana. And an udana is different than a gatha. An udana is called an ecstatic exclamation. And it's basically ecstatic poetry. And it's this sort of like, this idea of just an uncontrollable ecstatic utterance. And what you need to know is that there's a whole collection of udana in the Buddhist canon. And most of them are ecstatic exclamations of the Buddha, but there are other either bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, arhats that also have, including Aṅgulimāla, by the way. So this is his udana. This is his exclamation. One who once did live in negligence and then is negligent no more, they illuminate this world like the moon freed from clouds. One who checks the evil deeds they did while doing wholesome deeds instead. They illuminate this world like the moon freed from clouds. The youthful bhikkhu who devotes his efforts to the Buddha's teaching, he illuminates this world like the moon freed from clouds. Let my enemies hear this discourse on the Dharma. Let them be devoted to the teachings of the Buddha. Let my enemies wait on those good people who lead others to accept the Dharma. Let my enemies give ear from time to time and hear the Dharma of those who preach patient tolerance, of those who speak as well in praise of kindness, and let my enemies follow up with kind deeds. For surely then they would not wish to harm me, nor would they think of harming other beings. So those who would protect all, frail or strong, let them all attain the all-surpassing peace. Conduit makers guide the water. Fletchers straighten the shafts of arrows. Carpenters straighten out timber. But the wise seek to tame themselves. There are some that tame with beatings, some with goads and with whips. But I was tamed by such a one who has no rod nor any weapon. Ahimsaka, harmless, is the name I bear, though I was himsaka, though I was dangerous in the past. The name I bear today is true. I hurt no living being at all. And though I once lived as a bandit, known to all as Aṅgulimāla, one whom the great flood had swept away, I went for refuge to the Buddha. And though I was once bloody-handed, with the name Aṅgulimāla, see the refuge I have found. The bond of being has been cut. While I did many deeds that lead to rebirths in the evil realms, yet their results have reached me now. And so I now eat, free from debt, worthy of offerings, an arahat. They are fools and have no sense, those who give themselves over to negligence. But those of wisdom guard diligence and treat it as their greatest good. Do not give way to negligence, nor seek delight in sensual pleasures, but meditate with diligence so as to reach the perfect bliss. So, welcome to that choice of mine, and let it stand. It was not ill made. Of all the teachings in the world resorted to, I've come to the very best. So, welcome to the choice I've made, and let it stand. It was not ill made. I have attained the triple knowledge and done all that the Buddha teaches. And that concludes the sutra. Any comments about our udana, our ecstatic poem? So this is this is, I've even in a way mentioning the Diamond Sutra, like there's something about this sutra that's like, it leans Mahayana. And when I say that, what I mean is it's like, it's leaning deeply into the compassion side of things. I would love to just point out if you didn't catch it, I did my best reading the Udana, but if you didn't catch it, part of what he's saying in the poem is like, let my enemies, like let all the terrible people in the world hear the Dharma and pray they get it. Because if they get it, they won't harm you, they won't harm other people. It's a win-win, right? And so this is where the Bodhisattva, like in the Mahayana tradition, is really praying for everybody to wake up. It's the mission, it's the vow. And the idea here is like, again, everybody wins in that way. So I just want to point out that kind of that message of like that, just that beautiful message of like, let my enemies hear this, right? So beautiful. Anything else? I feel like there was one other thing from the poem that popped up, but any thoughts? Yeah, no. And then Noe.
Um, Two things. It's such a beautiful sutra, and it really is very helpful for, I'll speak for myself, any of us who've ever done anything we regret. Just like you can start from this moment and going forward. And then my other comment is we, the Dharma Collective, did some work years ago with the Grip Institute. There are a lot of people who do work in prisons using a Buddhist framework, but GRIP is very beloved to me. The GRIP stands for Guiding Rage into Power, and they work with people who've committed really intense crimes, and they do all kinds of support work with them. And just one of the amazing things is, of the people who go through the group GRIP training and are released from prison, many of them aren't. They're just in there for life or for anyway. But of those who are released, they have like almost a zero recidivism rate.
Nice.
So it's just the power of the Dharma for all of us, and that redemption, I don't like that word, but
Yes.
redemption is possible for everyone. And I think that's a really helpful way to look at the world when you are interacting with it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And on that note, real quickly, um, you know, one of the things that for me that comes up with a sutra like this, and I kind of alluded to it at the beginning of the talk, it's, I've heard this before, like being, having taught religion courses in religion a lot, not just Buddhism, but courses in religion a lot. I've had a lot of conversations with students about like this idea of like, this idea that somebody could lead such a bad life and then, oh, they just find Jesus and they're like, they're off the hook or whatever. And I get sort of the concern or the critique of that. But when you really, and I guess I wanted to get back to the beginning of his poem, of his Udana, where he says, one who once lived in negligence, who lives in negligence no more, illuminates the world, right? Like the moon cleared from clouds, right? Well, the thing about it is, it's like, I know that that's like, um, a complicated idea, karmically speaking, in terms of somebody who does so much bad and then, oh, they convert. But if you take a step back, isn't that what we want? Like, don't we want all the bad people to stop? Right? So, if somebody does that, even like somebody like Aṅgulimāla, if they actually stop, we want them to stop. Right? And so I think that idea of like, oh, they just get to like stop, it's like, yeah, isn't that good? So I just want to kind of put that out there as a way of interpreting that. How could it be that a guy like Angulimala illuminates the world? Because he's a shining example of what we would like to see happen in that way. Now, obviously, we would like for there to never be violence. Obviously. But in that way, with somebody like Angulimala, what else would we have wanted? I wanted the Buddha to go down that street and put a stop to it in that way. So,
I just want to make one
yeah,
more comment that I'll
please.
defer to you, Noe, which is that, there's a very current example of that in Israel and Palestine, where people who are former combatants, former people who were either in the Israeli Defense Forces, Israeli Army, or were uh, caused harm to Israeli Palestinians, who caused harm to Israelis as combatants. They have a group called Combatants for Peace, where they get together and talk to each other. And when I listen to them, that's the only time I feel hope for peace. If the people who have done that kind of harm to each other out of, greed, hatred, or delusion, let's confirm that, can come out of that and talk about peace, then there's hope. So thank you.
You said it, Noam. That's, yep. Noe, you had a comment?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Noam. That was wonderful. And thank you, Michael. The part here, in the fourth to the end, they are fools and have no sense, who give themselves to negligence, but those of wisdom guard diligence and treat it as their greatest good. And and it just ties into always the here and now. When do I have an opportunity to do that? Here and now, here and now. And if I may just take a moment, this story resonates quite greatly with me, because when I used to be a doorman at a bar, there was a man in the back room causing a lot of problems, a big man, a mean man. And people came out and said, that guy is really threatening everybody. I said, okay, well, let me go deal with it. And I'm not very big. And they followed me, and I said, no, 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 I'll take care of it. And I went in there, and he was the only man there, and he was 6'5", 250 pounds, but I knew him.
Hmm.
And he looked at me, and flames coming out of his nostrils with hate. And I just put my hands out and said, give me a hug. And he did. And I was able to calm him. I said, let's go outside and let's talk. And whatever the problem was, it was a bad place for him. And people, everything was here. He was looking for thumbs to cut off. So this story really resonated with me in that memory of, like, I'm glad I wasn't afraid. And they were like, no, come with. And I said, no, stay here, stay here. I can handle it. I also recognized that he had his foot in the cast, and exactly that's what I was going to step on if he came towards me. I'm not stupid. Thank you for indulging me. And what a great sutta. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Noam, and everyone.
Amazing, Noe, amazing, like real life Angulimala story. Especially because what I'm thinking of is you could have called the cops with the weapons and the force, but would that have actually been the solution? Or you did it like the Buddha did it? So excellent, excellent. Yeah, Robin.
Oops. Um, it's great because there's like no sense of punishment. And so and that's something that somehow we think that there's right and wrong, and then punishment will even out the score or whatever. So that just takes away that whole paradigm, which is, again, so freeing. I did want to ask you about something you'd said about the continuity of consciousness or mind stream. Is that something that there's a misconception that it's a stream, and that it's actually more moment to moment, and we see it as a continuous stream, or is it, or am I
No, indeed, it is
about that?
the analogy that is used is exactly like the idea of a film reel, where it's actually like a series of stills, but the stills are so happening so rapidly that there's a, a sense of continuity or just a fluidness. And what the Buddhist, especially the early Buddhist tradition, talks about is that consciousness happens thought moment by thought moment. These are called kshanas. And at any given moment, and these are usually measured in like 1/72nd of a second. So in a second, 72 kshanas happen, 72 thought moments happen, but in a second, we don't feel all of those thought moments. It just feels like thinking. And that's where we get lulled into the delusion of being an entity rather than being this thought moment, by which I mean this thought moment, by which I mean this thought moment. So, yeah. And so back to kind of Noe's idea, Noe's often bringing up the idea of kind of being in the here and now. That's wise because this thought moment is only here and now. So the idea of yesterday's thought moments, tomorrow's thought moments, those are just ideas in this present thought moment. And then, yeah, sorry. Oh, good question. We will have opportunity to talk more about it some other time. All right, everybody, unless there's any other questions, comments, answers, or ideas, then that'll do it for the Aṅgulimāla Sutta. That'll do it for tonight's Dharma Doors. Thank you so much. Stay tuned till next week, next Sunday night, going on to the next sutra. So hope to see you then.